Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for Friday, February 11th, 2022. I'm filming in the morning before going to work during such a time that the sun streams in through the window onto me. It's not the best time for filming, really. I closed my blinds, which helps a little, but you know, they have slats in them, so the light's just weird. But hopefully I'll be allowed to get away with it as I talk about the first books I've read in February. This is my first AM reading video for February, and as such, I will point you to my last literary newsletter, which I'll link down below. I published a handful of days ago. It contains information about, you know, literary news that caught my fancy in January. I have a book pick, I have a favorite book quote, and I have snippets of the reviews of the 10 books that I read in January. So if you're interested in what I think about any of those titles, you'll find all of that down there. But getting into the meat of this video, I'll start by talking about the latest short story I read in this collection by Dorothy Parker. I've been reading one short story per AM reading video since May in this collection, slowly making it through. This one is called Dusk Before Fireworks, which she published in 1932. We're getting away from her dashed off stories, which I think are kind of my favorite, the way they cut to the chase. This one takes place in Paris. It's kind of a similar situation because all of Parker's stories really are about criticizing relations, especially between the sexes. And so this is on a date between Hobie and Kit at Hobie's apartment, and they're trying to have a drink together, but they keep getting interrupted by his phone, where he has a lot of women friends calling, and he claims they're just friends. But I think you could tell, especially through the dialogue, which, you know, isn't, you know, overt, but, you know, gives enough of a hint about the reality of the situation, that he's quite the ladies' man. In fact, I think at the beginning of the story, Parker says the only woman who hates him is his sister. So anyway, she's getting herself worked up, and he's denying that anything's happening, but, you know, ultimately she kind of gets the picture after so many calls. I gotta say, you know, we give a lot of flack to people in today's day and age about constant social media use, but if this is par for the course for social interaction in 1932, I think that phone is quite the same. So anyway, she leaves, and even though, you know, she knows he's a bit of a cad, I think, you know, she's still distressed by how this relationship is going, and, you know, she'd gone on a very similar date with him the week before and said, well, when I got home, I tried to call you and I couldn't reach you. And he's like, well, nonsense, I was here, what do you mean? But at the end of this story, we see how he times how long it would take her to get home, and that's when he takes the phone off the hook. So anyway, another thing I just dislike about, I think, the style of the stories in this time period is just how heavy they are on exposition. I feel like we've gotten away from that a fair bit in today's day and age. That's why I also miss the dashed off stories a bit. But anyway, it's quite the way to start a morning. You know, I think Parker's pretty cynical about human interactions. But then again, maybe we need someone like this to cut to the quick of our social interactions. Moving on to a book chronicling a very different sort of relationship. The first book that I finished this month is In This Place Together, A Palestinian's Journey to Collective Liberation by Penina, Eilberg-Scwartz, and Sulaiman, Khatib. Penina is an American Jewish Ashkenazi woman, and Sulaiman is a man who lives in Palestine and with his family through generations. Anyway, I read this for the Israel Book Club at my synagogue. It's definitely the book that gets most into the Palestinian perspective, even though it was technically written, or maybe filtered is the right word, reported through a Jewish woman, an American Jewish woman, something that she struggled with a lot when he came to her asking for her help to do this. They had met through speaking engagements and that sort of thing. She is a writer on her own, writing about the occupation a lot of the time, and she ultimately came around to the idea and largely excised herself from the story, as she wanted to do, and to get his viewpoint and everything out there. Sulaiman is a man who went to prison in the West Bank, an Israeli prison, when he was 14, after he and a friend stabbed two Israelis who were hiking. He was in prison for over a decade, and it talks a lot about the injustices of the prison system there, but also how his experiences there and sort of the community that he built up with fellow prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, really shaped his life in terms of how he ultimately moved into a desire for nonviolence. I think also sort of the changing tides of history played into that. In the broader world, like he's a Fatah member, and there were Palestinian movements like Hamas, which were growing much more violent and targeting more civilians, and I think that played into his desire to reach toward Israelis in the spirit of communication and in nonviolence, and he started the group Combatants for Peace. And this book chronicles his journey. It's very much an inward and spiritual journey, as much as talking about the types of people, Israeli and Palestinian, that he met along the way. Eilberg-Scwartz does a lot of reporting, and you get a lot of other people's perspectives about their histories and their engagement with this movement. But Sulaiman very much is at the center of it. His relationship with his family and how it changes, because he becomes a larger than life, seems like a weird way to put it, but his mission becomes a lot larger than the family and his duties to them. And then he's also challenging himself in terms of like, how much am I going to engage with Israeli narratives about the meaning of Israel to them. And one thing I certainly appreciate is this acknowledgement that it's about more than propaganda. It really is something that, Israel plays, the idea of the Jewish homeland plays an outsized part in Jewish history and culture from antiquity. So I certainly appreciated that. I mean, this really very much is a book about how people challenge themselves to see other opinions, and that can hopefully encourage other people to do the same, to challenge their norms and move outside their bubble. Although it also does take into account, all of this conversation is important, but we're still living within the reality of systemic power, where, the Israeli side has this power, this oppressive power in the occupation over Palestinians. So it's quite the balance to strike, and I feel like overall they did a very good job with it. It certainly made me interested to engage with them, including Penina, whose I think affiliations are more far left than my own, and she is going into the anti-Zionist camp. So yeah, overall this was a moving and challenging and I think important read for me. I don't know what people would think about me saying this is in a similar vein, but I also just finished on audiobook Persepolis Rising by James S. A. Corey, which is the 7th book in the Expanse series. The Expanse is a science fiction series, but it very much deals with politics and cultural movements alongside, some supernatural sort of elements as well, and how those interact with the politics and all of those movements. This book is well into the Expanse series and goes beyond the television show, which just ended. So I'm not entirely sure how to discuss it without spoiling everything, except to say, I don't know, this does take place 30 years into the future after all of the conclusion of the events of the 6 previous books, because we have this sort of peace period in a way after everything shakes out at the end of book 6. And it takes that 30 years until a sort of a secret society has enough power to be able to sort of upset the, I want to say world stage, but it's more like galactal stage again. And we are in the 24th century, so 30 years in the future means that our main characters are still around, a little older, but still very much around and relatively healthy for the most part, and ready to deal with these new realities, which in this book actually are more political. Like, we're talking more about these political clashes, and then the proto-molecule and supernatural alien stuff is a little more on the back burner, although it certainly influenced how we got to where we are. But I think we're going to get more into the supernatural stuff in the next two books. In fact, one of the writers, who comprises James S. A. Corey, says the final trilogy is a bit of a epic fantasy trilogy. And we actually end on more of a cliffhanger in this book than we have in any other, where the storylines were a little more wrapped up, even though the overarching one was still going on. But in this one, we have some storylines that definitely are in the to-be-continued phase. I actually found this book to be a little more disappointing than I found the last several books of The Expanse, many of which made my favorite books of 2021 list. I struggled a little with the characterization, mostly that, you know, we haven't seen our main characters on the ship Vercinante for 30 years now, but except for a couple of situations, it doesn't seem like much has changed for them, which just doesn't ring true. Like, I respect that they wanted to take these 30 years because not much was happening by way of the overarching plot to talk about, but it felt like they didn't do the work to say, hey, these people have actually lived life for 30 years and not just, you know, been in a stasis, you know, of, oh, we're going to do the same thing over and over again and nothing much is going to change. I don't know. I have trouble with that. I feel like this is really where the show does so much better, especially for non-Holden characters, of making them seem more dynamic and more like people than the books did, and then this 30-year gap really just exacerbated that problem. And another problem I did have is the way that the politics are going. This is sort of an evil empire story, or, you know, going more in that vein, and it's a lot more shallow in terms of how it probes political realities than anything from the past has been, which has been deeply nuanced, which their MO has always been, the author's MO has always been that everybody has a legitimate point of view. And I guess you could say that the Laconians have a legitimate point of view, but it's incredibly one-dimensional. You know, their mission basically to force themselves onto everyone else, no matter what they say. It's just a lot more one-dimensional and a lot less empathetic than anything else we've dealt with so far. So in a way, that's disappointing. And then I just also quibble, I guess, about some of the choices that the writers make along the way. But ultimately, as the story went on and focusing on the characters and, you know, my characters who I've been with all this time and their responses to what's going on, and the cultural stuff going on amidst the inners and the belters, that stuff all worked for me much better. So I'm still engaged with the story, and I'm hoping that maybe my 5-star feels will return with the second two as we get more into the supernatural stuff, which I think could still be pretty fun. You know, I think The Expanse, in fact, out of a lot of science fiction, really has been more hard sci-fi in a way. You know, there's no warp drives or anything like that. This is, but the proto-molecule and the larger-than-life implications have been steadily growing since book 1, and I do think they're going to reach a peak point in the next 2 books, and I'm excited for them. And now I am reading The Loved Ones by Sonya Chung. This is a book I put on my Goodreads TBR back in 2017, so it's like it was near the top of my list, and so I wanted to get to it this month. And this is also put out by a small press, which I'll link down below. There's another book I want to get to this year because it's near the top of my Goodreads TBR, which is also put out by this small press, so that's kind of fun. I'm not sure how I heard about this. Usually when I hear about non-Jewish books that I put on my Goodreads around this time, I assume it was either Book Riot or BookTube. And then I went snooping around the Goodreads page for this book, and I saw Sean the Book Maniac wrote a review of it, although I think he did after I put it on my TBR. But anyway, as I started reading, I realized probably one of the reasons I put this on was that the story largely takes place in Washington, D.C. and Silver Spring, which is where I work and live. And then there is a rather tragic event, inciting sort of a climactic event that takes place in Rehoboth Beach, where me and my family vacationed for years. And in fact, I made it the setting of one of my own short stories. So there's this personal connection, I think, in a way, even though the family and the characters in play aren't otherwise much like me. This story takes place, well, it spans, I believe. Right now I've read parts that take place in the 70s and the 80s. I think the story will move into later decades. But the first part takes place in the early 80s. We're following this mixed race family. Charles, who was an African-American serviceman, met Alice, who was a white American working in Korea when he was serviced there. They were dating, she got pregnant, they decided to marry, especially since he had grown up without a father figure, so he kind of wanted to do right and change by that. And then they ultimately moved to his family home in D.C. Several years later, they have 2 children, and they decide they want to engage a babysitter, and Alice works at just started working again at a nursing home in Silver Spring for senior citizens who are Korean, and one of her colleagues is an immigrant from Korea and has a young 13-year-old or 12-year-old daughter named Hannah who takes on the job. And so we see them interact a bit until Alice decides maybe we should invite her with us to Rehoboth Beach for our week-long vacation. And then that's when a tragic event strikes that, you know, changes everybody's lives. And then we go back into the past, actually, and chronicle when Alice and Charles met. And also we chronicle what's going on with Hannah's parents. Hannah's parents left Korea, well, in the midst of a lot of stuff. First of all, they got married across class lines. Hannah's father was a landowner, and her mother was the daughter of one of his tenants, and the families did not like this. And then amidst all of that, the Korean War was raging, and you know, a lot of places became very unsafe. And they ultimately ended up in America, but they come back in the 70s to Korea when Hannah's grandfather, her paternal grandfather, dies, but the family refuses to have anything to do with them, and we get more into the drama of all of that. I actually liked this section. I felt like it fleshed out all of these characters a bit more, when I felt like in the first section things were moving a little too fast for me. I felt like it relied a little too much on sort of exposition and overtelling things. So I didn't actually engage as much with the first section. You know, there were bits and pieces that I latched onto before the tragic event, and I do think we're going to go back to the 80s storyline now. But yeah, it's definitely a book that is not linear, which I guess in a way makes it interesting. You know, this one got pretty high reviews, I think, and I'm not sure I'm totally there yet, but I'm still very willing to make it there. I hope I don't hate the book. I actually like the book. I'm still invested to see where the characters go, but I hope I also feel those high, fuzzy feelings as well at the end of this. But we will see, and I will report back next week. But anyway, next on my docket, I am finally moving to the BookTube Prize, and to this audiobook, The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nghi, which is a fantastical and Asian-inspired retelling of The Great Gatsby. I definitely feel like I've waited a bit long to get to my BookTube Prize reading this month. I got a chop now because the BookTube Prize Octafinals will be ending at the end of March, and I have 6 books to get through, starting with this one, which I will not say any more about because as an official judge I cannot divulge my opinions until this round is over. But the BookTube Prize is an annual prize started by Robert at Barter Hordes, wherein members of this community and the online bookish community get together to judge the best in fiction, nonfiction, and translated fiction published in the US last year. So I will link down to BookTube Prize information and also my own personal Octafinals information down below. So that about covers it for me now. As usual, I've rambled on far longer than I thought I would, so I'm sure it's actually quite apparent today, given how the light has changed over me. I hope that's more amusing than it is annoying. But anyway, I hope to get this video up tonight after I return. And then this weekend I'm going to my parents' house in Baltimore because Thursday was my mother's birthday, so I have to go see her. And I actually didn't get to see my sister for her birthday in January, so I have a bunch of gifts to wrap and give on over to them. So I'll be away for most of the weekend, but hopefully I can get in a little reading on the side, and plus, of course, it's always nice to see people. It's been a little while. Anyway, you can expect me back on this channel sometime next week when I do my author's answer video. It's a monthly video that I do. But this time I also have a surprise announcement to tack on top of it, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I hope you're all enjoying your reading as we approach mid-month of February. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.